So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a conversation about microaggressions and allyship. I'm Dr. Reneé Chandler, the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at Oglethorpe, a new position. I've been here almost 2 months, and my pronouns are she, her. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone being here. I recognize that we are coming into this space with all kinds of concerns and work that needs to be done and burdens and things that are happening nationally that we're paying attention to. But I'm really thankful to have this time with all of you and to learn from you and to hear about your experiences. And I hope that this will be, or I know that this will be the beginning of many conversations that we'll have about this topic and others. And also think of ways that we can bring more people into these conversations and really spread it across campus. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So start with our introduction of today's purpose and intention. Next, I'm going to go to ground rules for our conversation today. And these are just really expectations that will govern our conversation, how we engage with one another, how we engage with one another, how we also engage with people who are not necessarily here in this space right now, just being mindful of that. So I'll cover those. We'll do a brief grounding in activity. I'm a big believer in mindfulness and mindful practice. And so we'll do a brief grounding in activity. I'll do some just defining of terms in terms of defining microaggressions and allyship so that we have a common understanding and a common basis for the conversation today. But then the heart of why we're here really is the faculty and staff and student panel that we'll have. And so I have a series of questions for our panelists, but I really want it to be conversational. So I think other panelists can feel free to ask questions, and other members who are here from the audience can also ask questions as well. So that's what we will do for today. So for the ground rules, I want us to think about listening actively and respectfully to the people who are here as they talk about their experiences. Be sure to criticize ideas. If you hear something that you don't agree with or is troubling to you, think about criticizing the idea and not the individual. Focus on calling in instead of calling out. Which means that we want people to really join us in this work and join us in this community. And so think about how we can help bring them along in this process rather than making them feel called out. Commit to learning and not debating. Comment with the intent of sharing information and not to prove a point. Avoid blame, speculation, and inflammatory language. Be mindful of the time and space that you take up while you're speaking, right? So being sure to provide space for other people to share and to engage. Avoid making assumptions about any member of our campus community, especially those who may not be here in this conversation right now that we hope will join us later on. And then lastly, speak to your truth and to your experience, right? Don't try to represent the experiences of another person or another group of people or things that you may have heard. Speak to what is really true to what you have experienced and what you know for yourself. So any questions about that or anything that anyone from the group would like to add to those ground rules? Sorry, I can't see anyone. If you have something, you can certainly just take yourself off mute or put something in the chat. All good?
I think we're good.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so for grounding in, we're going to do a brief activity. And, as I said before, whenever I do a workshop or a training or have any kind of conversation, especially on topics that may be challenging or sensitive or difficult, I think it's important to engage in these kinds of mindfulness activities. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which allows us to relax and to rest. It helps us to be present in the moment. Again, as I mentioned, there are all kinds of things happening outside of this space, but we want to really sort of bring ourselves to this moment and prepare ourselves to engage with one another and to do the work that we want to do here. It increases feelings of safety in this space. So recognizing that Everyone here is here with good intentions, and it's a space where you should feel safe to talk and to share your experiences. And then lastly, it also helps to develop the skill sets that you need to promote healing. So I hope that, this is an activity that you can use in places outside of this particular space. And you can sort of bring yourself back to this moment and the feeling anytime you're experiencing sort of stress or any other kind of tension. So normally if we were in person, I like to do very elaborate sort of grounding in activities, but since we're virtual, we'll do one that's very simple. And so this one is called 10 breaths. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take 10 breaths and focus your attention on the breathing in and the breathing out, right? And on each exhale, you're gonna count, right? So you breathe in slowly through the nose, and then out through the mouth, and that's 1, right? And so then you do it again, in through the nose, slowly, out through the mouth, that's 2, right? And sometimes I might give like a mantra, for you to say to yourself while you're doing it, but for now, we'll just focus on counting on the exhale. I realize that we may do this at different paces. So you can either just close your eyes and breathe and sort of count to yourself. You can turn off your camera while you're doing this. And then once you're done, you can turn your camera back on. And then once it sort of seems like everybody in this space is sort of back and sort of done with the activity, then I'll continue on, okay? So 10 breaths, and do it in a way that makes you feel comfortable, okay? So we'll start now. All right, so I think we have everyone back. So thank you for engaging in that. How did that feel? Good, okay, I see some thumbs up, thank you. All right, and then next I want to acknowledge that, on the topic of microaggressions and allyship, that we all have resources and texts and reading and videos that have probably informed our thinking about the topic. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of knowledge and resources that are here in this group. So if there's anything that, while you're speaking or while you're thinking that you want to share with the group, feel free to put that in the chat. And so when I upload this video, I'll also upload the sources and say that, this came from individuals that were participating in this workshop. But these are some of the sources that influence my thinking about microaggressions and allyship. And so some of the definitions that you'll see in the presentation come from these texts as well. Okay, so we'll start off by just defining some terms. So in terms of defining microaggressions, they are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults. And I underlined here, verbal, behavioral, and environmental. I think that's a really important thing to understand about these. Oftentimes when we hear the phrase microaggressions, we think that we're referring to things that people may say. But it actually takes multiple forms and it occurs in multiple contexts. So verbal may be something that someone says, but it's also behavioral, right? If you step onto an elevator and someone else comes on and you grab your purse or you grab your wallet, right? That's a physical action that communicates a message about what you're thinking. Or environmental. I had someone send me a PowerPoint the other day just to ask for my input on the PowerPoint. And I mentioned to them that all of the examples that they used in that PowerPoint were of white, able-bodied individuals, right? And so I asked them to just be mindful of what they're communicating about the community, who's involved, who belongs in the community by, that use of imagery. You can also think about leadership, right? If everyone in a leadership position has a particular identity, what message is that sending about who belongs and who is welcome, right, in that space? So they occur in these multiple forms. There are also micro insults, and all of this work comes from Daryl Daryl Sue, who's at Columbia University and who does a lot of research and writing in the area of talking about microaggressions. So micro insults are characterized by communications that convey rudeness and insensitivity and demean a person's racial heritage or identity. They represent subtle snubs, frequently unknown to the perpetrator, but clearly convey a hidden and insulting message to the recipient. And then lastly, micro invalidations are when a person's comments invalidates or undermines the experiences of a certain group of people. And an example of a micro invalidation would be a white person telling a Black person that racism doesn't exist in today's society, right? Really sort of communicating that because it's not real for me, then it's not real for you or for anyone else, right? So these are some of the terms that we'll be thinking about for today's conversation. One of the reasons that they're important and why they can be harmful to our community is that they communicate a message to the recipient that something is wrong with them, that they do not belong, or that their presence in existence is a problem. They have very little to do with intent, right? So we've all heard the phrase, you know, good intentions pave the road to you know where, right? It has nothing to do with your intention. And in fact, a microaggression may come from a place where you're trying to communicate a compliment to someone, but there's a meta narrative, there's a meta communication that undermines whatever that good intention may have been. And so the impact is actually what is harmful to the recipient, and the impact is what we need to pay attention to in this particular situation. They are deeply rooted in power relations and social historical contexts of white supremacy, heteronormativity, classism, patriarchy and sexism, and histories of colonization and exclusion. And so we may think that because we are on a very diverse college campus, that maybe these things aren't governing or informing our relationships, but they absolutely are, right? And so we have to be aware of how our relationships are defined by forces and structures that are much bigger than what we see in our everyday interactions. We have to be aware of how power is at play on our campus and how it impacts our relationships. And then lastly, we also have to take very seriously the consequences of not acting, right? So one of the things that Daryl Sue says is that, you know, these microaggressions, they are, you know, oftentimes small acts that build up. They have a kind of cumulative effect. They happen over and over and over again. And they end up developing a kind of microaggressive stress within the individual, the person who is a target of these acts. And so the person who is the target may experience things like depression and anxiety and evidence of trauma. There's a lot of research that shows that college students will in some cases engage in coping behaviors and mechanisms that are harmful and destructive for them, such as excessive drinking or withdrawal from the community or other forms of self-harm. So it's important, you know, oftentimes, one of the initial reactions that some may have to talking about microaggressions is that, well, the solution is just to not be so sensitive. But as we are building our own DEI practices here as an institution, we need to realize the harm that these microaggressions and microinvalidations and microinsults actually pose to our community and our ability really to work with one another. So in terms of examples, there are a number of resources that I like to use that not only talk about what microaggressions are, but you know, some of the common themes that we see within microaggressions and what they address. So one of those resources is Microaggressions, Power, Privilege, and Everyday Life, which is a website. And they have an anonymous form that anybody can go to that site and submit, and you can tell the story of an experience or a microaggression that you've experienced in your everyday life. And it's been around, that website's been around for a number of years, and has a lot of material in it that I'll often use in presentations about microaggressions. There's also a handout from the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, that focuses on verbal and nonverbal microaggressions. And so, you know, what does it look like? What do they sound like? What is the message that's being communicated, and sort of why that's harmful. So I just have a few examples here of what they look like. So asking someone, you know, where are you from? Or telling them that they speak English very well. Well, the assumption that you're making is that that person is a foreigner or an outsider, or that they don't belong, right? One of the things that I've often started doing, that if I'm curious about someone's story, right, where they come from, which is fine. It's fine to want to know more about a person, but let them tell that story in the way that they want to. So sometimes I will ask a person, you know, are you from Atlanta, right? I start with the assumption that they are from here. And if that's not the case, then allow them to tell their story as they want to tell it. And sometimes you ask a question like that and the response will be, yes, I've lived here for 30 years of my life. So I am from here. There are ways that you can show interest in a person without making assumptions about them being an outsider or being other, right? Another example is, when I look at you, I don't see color. Right. And so you may be trying to communicate a good message, but what ends up coming through that meta communication is that you're denying a person's cultural experience and existence, especially for, you know, persons of color who their racial identity is a very important part of their of how they define themselves and how they see themselves. And really what you're saying is that I don't see race because it's not real for me. Right. Making references to life choices when you're speaking with someone from the LGBTQ community, or dismissing a person's pronouns. You know, you're making an assumption about their relationships, about their own awareness of themselves, sending messages that they don't belong, and that your way of seeing them is more important than how they see themselves, right? Which is really harmful to our ability to build a community here, okay? I like this quote from Ibram Kendi on microaggressions. It resonated really strongly with me. This comes from his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he says that, I do not use microaggression anymore. I detest the post-racial platform that supported its sudden popularity. I detest its component parts, micro and aggression. A persistent daily low hum of racist abuse is not minor. I use the term abuse because aggression is not as exacting a term. Abuse accurately describes the action and its effects on people: distress, anger, worry, depression, anxiety, pain, fatigue, and suicide. What other people call racial microaggressions, I call racist abuse. And I call the zero tolerance policies preventing and punishing these abusers what they are: anti-racist. Only racists shy away from the R word. Racism is steeped in denial. So again, going back to this idea of why this is important, it's not about the intent, regardless of what good intentions a person may have, but it's really about the impact. And that's what we need to focus on in these conversations. So one of the ways that we can address microaggressions in our community is through the practice of allyship, right? And so allyship is demonstrated by an individual who uses the social power to which one has access to interrupt social injustice directed at targeted groups. Allyship means to be an agent of change rather than an agent of opposition. And so there's a group of faculty who do research there at Smith College who refer to some of these actions as micro-resistance, right? And these are ways that we can intervene when microaggressions occur. And then also be sure to affirm the individual who is potentially the target of these microaggressions. There are 4 areas of allyship. They don't necessarily happen in this order. They can happen in any order, but all 4 of these areas are incredibly important. So raising your own awareness, having conversations like this, taking conversations like this to different areas around campus to help raise the awareness of others, developing the skill sets that you need, learning what the elements are of engaging in allyship, engaging in upstander behavior, knowledge and education about those social historical contexts in which I was talking about before, and then also engaging in action. And for me, I really believe that action is the core of allyship. It's fine to raise your own awareness, to read books, to be in book groups, right? To have conversations like this, but you have to be prepared to leave these spaces and actually put action behind the words that have been spoken here. So some of these things in practice would be asking clarifying questions. I've often found this is probably one of the best strategies that I have used in moments where I've seen microaggressions take place, whether it's the classroom or in, outside of campus in my personal life. If someone has said something that is offensive or hurtful, asking them what their real intention is. And the more questions that you ask that person about what they're saying, I think they begin to realize some of the absurdity of the assumptions that they've made, either about a person or about a group of people. Explaining why an action or saying is harmful, is problematic and hurtful. Intervenes in ways that show support for the target, right? So maybe that means finding a way to remove the person who is a target of a microaggression from that situation, and showing support for them. Request that appropriate action be taken and give others the opportunity to correct themselves. Along with that, recognizing that it's a privilege to teach and correct others. And so what I mean by that is we can, all of us here, probably imagine times where someone had to call us out, right? We said something that was insensitive, not realizing what we were saying. And that person had to say something to us to educate us in that moment. That's happened to me. I'm thankful when that's happened. I'm thankful that people are willing to do that. And it's an opportunity to give a gift to a member of this community, to teach them in the moment about how to do better, right? And how to better treat members of this community. And so we should see it that way. If someone makes a mistake, especially if they had a good intention, offer them a gentle correction. If they accept it, if they apologize, then let that be it, right? Don't continue to talk about the person or make an issue of it. You actually had the opportunity to teach them something in that moment, and that's really a gift for that individual. Admit when you've committed a microaggression, acknowledge it and apologize. Don't be reactive and don't be defensive. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, prevent microaggressions in the first place. Be mindful of the language that we use, how it impacts others, and especially those from minoritized populations. The last part I have here is just being more specific in your communication. So one of the reasons why microaggressions happen, not in all cases, but in a number of cases, is because we're being we're being lazy with our language and lazy with our communication, right? If you're really impressed with someone's speaking skills, if they did a great job on a presentation in class, then tell them that, right? Tell them that they did a really great job on their presentation and you're really impressed. But you don't have to make comparisons to other members of their social group that would potentially be offensive. Also, if a student is struggling and having a hard time, or even a colleague is struggling and having a hard time, not mentioning potentially a poor performance or an exam or a project that they were working on. Your real intention is to know if they're doing okay. So just ask them that, right? Ask them how they're doing. Ask them if they need help or if they need support with anything, but don't make comments about, you're surprised by a performance that they've given because you expected more of them. That could be potentially harmful as well. So those are just some of my thoughts. I just wanted to provide a foundation for our conversation today. I know that our panelists will have their own input and examples and sort of definitions to share. So we'll transition now to the panel. Let me stop sharing. And what I'll do is I'll just ask our panelists who are here this afternoon to introduce themselves, share your pronouns, your role here at Oglethorpe, and then, what do you most hope to get out of today's conversation? So why don't we start with Natasha?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natasha Bird. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Did you say hometown as well?
Sure. Yep. Hometown. Mm-hmm.
So I am from a military family. So Paulding County, Douglasville, Hiram, Georgia is where I was raised the longest, but I was born in Florida, lived in Alabama, Ohio, and then I lived in Rochester for a little bit for grad school. And then I'm hopeful for just discussion. I hope that people take away that they have impact and that can be positive or negative, and that we get to continue to be lifelong learners and kind of grow in learning about people that are different from ourselves.
Thank you. Josue.
So Josue again, pronouns he, him. I work with Civic Engagement Center. I was born in Mexico City before my mom brought me to Brunswick, Georgia, and I've been here in Brunswick ever since. What I would like to see from, I guess, this panel is the start of the relationship. So it's obviously something, yes, there's a seed basically, something that we can continue to work on. Hopefully in the future, have these panels and definitely talk about like race and all everything basically. I'm really happy about this panel, so that's it.
Thank you. Sarah.
Hello, my name is Sarah Gussman. I am a sophomore from Sandy Springs, Georgia. My pronouns are she, her. I am a member of Tri Sigma sorority. I'm a sophomore economics major. And I'm also a junior Senate elect. Yeah, and as Josue said, what I'm looking forward to with this panel is kind of just sort of planting the seed and sort of just, starting that conversation and hopefully, growing it into, more meaningful discussions throughout the year and, with different facets of campus life and faculty and staff and everyone. So, yeah.
Thank you. So Janelle.
Hi, I'm Janelle Pham. I'm an assistant professor of sociology. This is my third year at Oglethorpe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's where I grew up. It's the capital of PA. It's not Philadelphia. Okay. And what I most hope to get out of today's discussion is I'm just hoping to learn more from hearing from others. And I also, if you're here today, I would consider you a leader in our campus community. And I think, it kind of starts here with those who want to see a change and make a change, and then kind of seeing it grow beyond here.
Thank you. Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley Miles. My pronouns, sorry. They are she, her. My hometown is Peachtree Cornish, Georgia. It's about 20 minutes from the school. What I hope to get out of this discussion, I was voted DEI chair of my sorority, Chi Omega. And so I really want to learn how to address certain topics within the sorority and also just get an understanding of different perspectives for the situation.
Thank you. And then lastly, I just want to acknowledge Ashrakat and the work that she did in bringing the panelists together, and just all the amazing work that you're doing on campus to promote these kinds of conversations as well. So Ashrakat, would you like to maybe share a few words?
Sure, thank you so much, Dr. Chandler. So my name is Ashrakat Hassan. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a freshman politics major here at Oglethorpe, and I'm in a lot of different organizations. I'm the civic engagement scholar for my class. I'm the freshman class president, going to be sophomore in the fall. And I'm VP of MSA, the Muslim Student Association, and the Peachtree Proletariat. So different facets of campus I'm a leader in. And what I really hope to get out of this discussion is really to start the conversation about that relationship with faculty. In our work, me and Josue, in our work in civic engagement, we often have these discussions with students. And I feel like now is the time that we have the discussion with faculty. So just building that bridge and, starting fresh is what I really wanted to accomplish from this. And I'm from Clarkston, Georgia, so not too far from Brookhaven. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so so to begin, I mentioned, we have new leadership, new administrators on campus, thinking about, building our strategies and our purpose and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I wanted to just start off with this question. Why do you think DEI is important for your experiences here and your work and your studies at Oglethorpe?
I can jump in on this one. So to me, DEI directly corresponds with my lived experience. It's not something that I can put, you can't just put your identity aside. And this is thinking also about, when people are like, oh, you need to be less sensitive. I can't desensitize myself, or I shouldn't have to desensitize myself to my own identity and lived experience. And so to me, if I feel like DEI is not being, part of the center of attention in, every aspect of Oglethorpe, be it, student life, academic, I don't feel comfortable learning here, and ultimately I came to Oglethorpe with the intention of, receiving an education and getting a degree. And if I'm unable to do that because there's not enough attention around promoting DEI, I can't get my degree. And, therefore Oglethorpe has failed to serve its purpose of providing me with an education.
Thank you.
I'll jump in next, I guess. In terms of, I'll start with the easy half of that question, right? How does it fit into my work here? I'm a sociologist. I feel like it's really easy, we kind of teach the first week the sociological imagination, right? Noticing the water you're in, right?
Mhm.
We tend to take for granted the social structures. And it's like the water I'm in every day is DEI stuff, right? So sometimes I almost have to step back when talking to some of my colleagues who are like, what? I hadn't thought about that before. And I'm like, really? But it's like I'm in that water all the time, right? And I think the work that, the types of classes I teach provide those opportunities for some of our students who have never had to think about those things before to unpack them. And not to feel embarrassed or, just to have a good understanding of how is our social order kind of constructed in ways that benefit others to the detriment of others. In terms of what it means to me, I think of DEI as, acknowledging our common humanity, but also thinking about our differences and how those can be leveraged to imagine a better world, right? And I think kind of, the inclusion part of that is central. It's always saying equity, right? Equity meaning you're acknowledging that you need to meet people where they're at, and also acknowledging that the fact that there's not a level playing field is the product of ongoing processes that have made it so that we have inequalities. And so I think that kind of informs a lot of the work that I do and how I teach my courses. But I always, in every class, I always learn more from my students than they probably learn from me. And they always kind of grow my understanding of DEI and why it's important to what I'm doing, and urges me to keep doing what I'm doing as far as my everyday work.
That's great. Thank you.
I don't mind going next. So I work within campus life. I'm the Associate Director of Residence Life, Health and Wellness. And so I think a lot of the work that we do in our spaces has to do with co-curricular learning, or the stuff that maybe is happening outside of the classroom. Everyone's doing that work, but I think we're thinking of that stuff. And specifically for myself, health promotion and wellness as a field says that well-being is everything. It is those stressors that Dr. Chandler talked about, those health outcomes that are related to health inequities. And so if folks are stressed because of racism and any number of oppressions, that we want to be addressing those and supporting people there. And so I think that that's why it matters. I apologize. And I want people to be able to show up as their full selves. I want people, I know for myself, I wish earlier on I realized how much of a main character I get to be. And sometimes when we're not centering margins and the majority identities, no matter what the social identity is, are centered, we often forget just about how expansive we can be, and that I don't have to worry about being called, I'll say an Oreo, right? Being white on the inside and black on the outside, because we learned early on that you don't sound white, right? That Black people talk and have any sorts of that people can sound however they want to. So I think those are some of the things that I think about for myself.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'll follow. Definitely going off like Natasha was saying, the reason I think it's important to me because it means refocusing to the most marginalized communities, meeting those people, their aspiration, their needs, and constantly empowering them. Again, I grew up in a very predominantly white area. Sometimes the only BIPOC in a room, and that definitely affected my my self-growth, my self-love, how you want to put it. So now the work I do is definitely refocusing on the most marginalized communities. I'm a tenant organizer, so I'm definitely working with families. And it's at the same time, it's some motivation for me. You begin to recognize the privileges now you have and the past, like my own past, and inspiring and being motivating to help these people by empowering them. So it's something I enjoy.
Thank you.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
I agree with everything that everybody has said so far. I am a public relations major, so in like the workforce, I'm going to be dealing with everybody, especially like since it's communications. And so DEI honestly is just something that's really important for that, but also just as a college student, knowing the spaces that I step into, I will be accepted. And I'll say that's something that I've had to definitely come to terms with a lot more this year, being away from home. I've also gone to PWIs like my entire life. And so like going through high school, I just remember I was trying so hard not to be the stereotype, to make sure like, okay, don't do this and don't say that, and make sure your teacher likes you because you see how they treat this other student. And I was just like looking back, it's just like, wow, I really shouldn't have to do that. And we should have like systems in place and maybe rules or like a DEI chair in place to make sure that that doesn't happen and that more people feel accepted just the way that they are and not experience all those prejudices like that. But also when we get into stuff like prejudices, that's an entirely different realm that we have to tackle.
Thank you. So, so moving on. So we've covered some of the definitions of microaggressions and allyship. What would you like to add to our understanding of how microaggressions work and the importance of allyship?
I think that going back to your slide, Dr. Chandler, that you had with the different steps for allyship, I certainly agree that action is by far the most important thing, but in order to get there, you first have to acknowledge that these, differences occur and that, certain people are treated differently and poorly because of their identities. I kind of think of it as you can't help someone if they don't want to help themselves. So if, you yourself as an individual don't decide to be more mindful or everyday practice of language and interacting with other people, then it doesn't matter how many times you get called out, you're not going to correct your own behavior. So I think first acknowledging that these things occur and being mindful of how you may be perpetrating these microaggressions, and also, from there saying, okay, what can I do? And actually taking those actionable steps is definitely very important for Alex.
I think it's something that's constantly evolving. It's a relationship. It's not something you exchange simply. What I've noticed many times, people begin to read these resources and they begin to believe it, think it, reflect on it, but never like embody it and create relationships with people that are the ones affected by these like social mechanisms. So it's something definitely to constantly work and refocus your attention on people, something that will never, I guess, stop. So it's something, and relationship, something beautiful. So yeah.
Thank you.
I really want, oh, sorry, Natasha. I really want to echo what Sarah and Josue had said. It's an evolution of a constant behavior that you have to cultivate throughout your entire life. But a different, aspect of it that I do want to emphasize is self-reflection. When you are confronted with someone who said, this is hurtful or this doesn't, sound right to me, it's never a personal thing. It's just about the ideas and behavior that you emulate in conversation. And you have to understand that it's never personal. Mostly never is personal. So reflect on that statement that was made, reflect on your behavior and take it within every relationship, like Josue had said, and continue to, self-critique yourself. As much as you might read, as much as you might consume this information and consume the resources that have been presented to you, it will never mean anything unless you go out and do something about it in your relationship that you have. I think the most important thing for me is always ensuring that the people that I talk to feel safe and appreciated and their differences are embraced. And that means that if they come up to me with a conversation that I had with them that was inappropriate or hurtful, I won't say, well, that's not what my intentions was. I will always say, well, I'm so sorry that I made you feel this way. I'm going to self-reflect after that conversation. And that's important for everyone, regardless of, your ethnicity or creed.
Excellent. Natasha, did you want to jump in?
Sorry. Phone wants to ring every time I want to talk. Apologies. I think Astricot said it beautifully, right? That we do need to do this focusing and always remember that there's a learning and unlearning. And I love saying lifelong learning, because this isn't one time that you come and get trained and then you know everything. That there's enough diversity in the world. There are enough marginalized communities that you probably are not a part of, that you're going to have to continue to learn something for the rest of your life. And so getting comfortable with that discomfort, if that feels overwhelming, but that's okay. When we're talking about systems, that there are folks that benefit. And so I think sometimes people get scared of being called out. But as Astricot said, if someone is trusting you to say hey, you've harmed me in this way, they are giving you something, they're trusting you to make changes and believing that you have the ability to change and to do better and to correct those actions that were harmful. And then I know I've heard a lot about harms by 1,000 cuts. I don't like the death by 1,000 cuts, but this idea that recognizing that this takes away from your bandwidth and your capacity day to day, that when folks are experiencing these things every single day, oftentimes across many forms of their intersectionality and marginalizations, that potentially affects how they interact with their family or how they're able to show up in a classroom or at work. And so how do we hold space for the healing part of that? Because it can be a lot to have to hear those things day in and out, and then also have to figure out how you're going to teach people about how to do better themselves, oftentimes constantly. So I think those are my points.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So I was wondering if our panelists could just tell us about maybe some of your experiences with microaggressions. How did it impact you, and how did you handle it at that time?
Oh, sorry, Dr. Pham, you can go ahead.
Oh no, you're making me go first. That's all right. I'll put myself out there. The question I was sent was the earliest experiences, right? And I think about my earliest experiences is watching people talk to my dad, because my dad's an immigrant from Vietnam. And so talking really slow or speaking really loud to assume that he somehow, because they assume he doesn't know English, that they also need to speak louder, right? So that's my earliest kind of memory. But in terms of my own personal experiences, so in terms of my gender presentation, it's more on the masculine side. And so from early, throughout my life, it's going to the women's bathroom has been stressful events, because sometimes I walk into the bathroom and I get, a look or something that's oh, are you sure you need to be here kind of thing. And how does it impact you is, I kind of learned if I wanted to go into the ladies' room, I need to play up femininity before I go in. I can't change what I'm wearing right in the moment. But I can walk different, or I can kind of accentuate, my hair, things like that. And I don't think people, I've explained that to some of my friends. They're like, man, I had never thought about that. I just go to the bathroom. And it's well, yeah. But if you kind of feel like you're transgressing expectations about where bodies belong, which again it gets into this fact that we have these entrenched binaries about what gender is. There's only two: that it aligns with your sex, that it informs your sexuality or is indicative of your sexuality, which is all kind of a mess, right? We could talk about that, and it's its own separate panel. But I think I haven't handled it differently, right? I still do it, right? And it's sometimes I think to myself, why am I letting other people's kind of reactions inform how I experience or perform my gender, because it is a performance, right? We created this idea. So I think that's something that I still struggle with, is how do you acknowledge that problem, but not let it kind of define how you act. But it's, I think, I don't know, I don't want to presume anybody else's experiences, but maybe they feel the same way, right? Like, I recognize it, I know it's problematic in the way I respond to it sometimes, but I still do it as almost kind of a protective mechanism, right? It's easier for me in that moment to just play into the expectation rather than to address the problem head on, especially if it's like, I just want to go pee, right?
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
I kind of have a few examples. First one that I can think of is my mother is Japanese, and when I was born, I was a very fair white baby with very light brown hair, and I had a very pale complexion, especially in comparison to my mother. So my mother took me to my first pediatrician's appointment when I was an infant, and the nurse walks in and asks, "Are you her nanny? Where is her mother?" So this nurse had assumed that because my mother was of a much darker complexion than I was, that I wasn't her child. And I guess because she was, an East Asian woman, she was like an au pair or a nanny. So that's one example. Another would be when my brother, who has dyslexia and ADD, in his academic settings, unfortunately, he struggles a lot, and he's not always able to achieve the marks that he would like, or my parents would like, or that people expect of him. And oftentimes they get their grades back, and his friends will jokingly say, "Oh, you're Asian, I thought you would be better," or "You're Asian, you should be good at math." And so clearly, like, these are 8 to 10-year-old boys. They don't mean necessarily to be offensive. They mean it as a joke, but they don't, I think, fully understand how much that can hurt, my brother's confidence and his ability to achieve further academic success, and his, personal drive and motivation to try and do better. To him, he just thinks, "Oh, wow, I'm not meeting the mark. I must just be dumb," and he just gives up. And my final example would be, it's actually when I go to Japan. Japanese women, are expected to act a certain way, have a certain, demeanor, very quiet, very complicit. And so oftentimes when I'm in Japan, I sort of tone down my personality and act much more, quiet and respectful, and sort of complicit with what's going on around me. And kind of like Dr. Pham said, I do it out of protection. Like, I don't want people, I know I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to tone down my personality. I shouldn't, have to conform to their societal standards, but I do it because I don't want to be seen as an outsider. And that's especially difficult for me personally as a biracial woman, because no matter what I do, they're going to see me as an outsider. Even though I'm half Japanese and I speak fluent Japanese, they're going to see me as an outsider. So I do whatever I can in order to try and fit into their societal norms more.
I think the earliest thing would be my name. So my name in Spanish is Josue. And once I started school, I said my name is Josue. No one, I guess, would actually try to say it in Spanish. They, I guess, Englished it, and it's Josue now. So that, I guess, it's normalized now, but when I was a child, and still now, the name itself is not who I am or like who I grew up. It doesn't feel as my name in a way. And I guess being that model minority student, both from professors and people within my own community put me on this pedestal. They expect high things of me. And if I make an error or ask for help, something wrong with me. It's an invalidation of my own feelings and the struggles I go through. So it's something that constantly happens.
I want to echo everything that Josue had mentioned. I didn't even think about the name. Like, my name is, in Arabic, it's Ashrafat, and the letters are very hard to pronounce in English. Like, phonetically, it's very hard. So, as a child, I would always remember talking to teachers and just walking them through how to pronounce my name, and you pronounce it exactly how it's spelled. But it'd be very difficult for them, and that's understandable. But the way that I would react to it is that I would give them nicknames or something to call me to make it easier for them, instead of truly holding them accountable to my identity and who I am. And I've noticed that even in throughout high school, I would give my friends a nickname to call me. And I guess I never really understood, like, I thought it was kind of like a loving way, like an endearing term that they could use. And I'm still at the point where I would demand everyone to call me by my name, my full name. And I like the fact that they can call me Ash, it's fine. I feel like I should have told them, try your best to pronounce my name correctly, because that is my name. That's how I identify me. But that's a journey that I'm still on, to kind of like, ascertain my identity, and like, this is my name, I hold it with pride. My mother gave it to me, so why wouldn't I, hold it close to me and embrace it? But I guess it's just an effect of having a very foreign name. Another thing that I didn't really realize until we started this conversation was in high school. When I wore the hijab in middle school, it was a very big transition for a lot of people, because most of my life I've gone to school with these kids since I was a kid, and they've always seen my hair. So come middle school, when I started to wear it, they thought I was a different person. I never got treated differently necessarily, but it was just certain interactions that I noticed, like, oh, it's because of hijab. And in high school, I never thought this would happen. But a student I guess I had gotten angry at someone, or I had like an annoying remark or something, and someone had said, don't get her mad, she might blow you up, or something to that effect. And I look at the student, because I never thought they'd come out of their mouth before. And I had that conversation with them. I told them, that's very disrespectful. And even if it was a joke, and I had to explain to them that Islamic principles do not relate to what is going on in the Middle East, do not, confer the two. And it was a very hurtful conversation that I had to have. I think that, like, you have to explain to someone that religion does not ever, like, acknowledge violence, especially in this way. At least my religion doesn't. So I didn't know that I had to explain that to them. So both the name and my religion has had a major impact on the way people view me. And it's come to the point where after every interaction I ever had with a professor, academia, whatever, I will always say, is it because of my name, or is it because of my religion? I always, like, when something ever goes wrong, or if I get like a bad feeling, I will always assume that it's because of who I am and what I'm wearing. And that's a very dangerous and hurtful scenario to have, because you should never think that, like, because of your identity, someone's treating you differently. And I don't have the guts to ask and just tell them, like, is it because I'm Muslim, that you're treating me this way? Because I would be making an assumption on their part, and I would be wrong on my end. But those two are very big flags that I wear this with pride, sure, but at the same time, these interactions, you never know. So that's the first thing I'm going to assume, because I'm not from here and because I am Muslim. So those are like two of the earliest examples that I can think of a microaggression.
I guess I could jump in real quick. I guess I could say my first experience with microaggressions is whenever I was a kid and my mom would, like, introduce me to her friends and stuff like that. They'd say, oh, she speaks so well. And I'm like, as a kid, I'm like, yeah, I can make words, like, cool. But like now, like, yeah, and be like, yeah, I can, like, say apple correctly. But now, like, looking back, especially when, like, different people would say it, it's like, oh, maybe they were, like, assuming I'd speak, like, in a different way that I never really, like, thought of until I got older. And then another thing is my name, I have a middle name. Most people in America do, in other places too. But my middle name is Jaquise. And so, like, most people, they'd say, oh yeah, that's Ashley. And, like, we'd be talking. And then they'd say, well, what's your middle name? And, like, especially, like, with my friends, and I'd say Jaquise. And it's almost like oh, like, there's the Black in her. Like, kind of like, you can almost, like, see it in their face, like all right, I knew it was there. Like, I don't have one of the, like, traditionally, I guess, like, ethnic names that people would associate with people in my community. It's just Ashley. It's a name. But when I say Jaquise, people are always like, what? Or, like, I'll write it out and they'll, like, pronounce my name. They'll be like, oh, is it Jaquez? And stuff like that. And I'm like, it's really not. And it's French. It's not like it's that, like, hard to pronounce. But also with names, like Ashicott. I said that right. Did I say that right, Ash? Okay.
You did. Thank you.
I really wanted to make sure because I've heard people say it before and I'm like, I really hope I'm saying that right. But I had a friend that I'd known since kindergarten, and his name, I always called him Hassan. And it's similar to your last name, but he spells it with a U first instead of an A. And in the 5th grade, we were in math tutorial after school. And he said, guys, I have to tell you something. We said, okay. And he said, my name is Hassan. It's pronounced Hassan. And I was like, okay, it's Hassan. I've just been pronouncing it wrong my entire life. But everyone else was like, no, it's not, it's Hassan. Like they were literally like saying to him, that's not your name. That's not how you pronounce your name. And my teacher literally had to get up and say, no. He says his name is Hassan. You guys need to call him Hassan. That is what he wants to be called. That is how he says you pronounce his name. And looking back, I was just like, how bizarre is this that they just can't accept, okay, he's tired of people calling him by the wrong name because his name is not pronounced that way. And it hit me in the 5th grade, like, are you serious? Like, we can't just accept stuff like that. But I think that's like a big thing. Also, I've gotten the Oreo a lot. And it used to really not bother me because I got it so often, but now I'm just like, okay, just because I may have this certain demeanor or whatever doesn't mean I'm Black on the outside or on the inside. It's just I'm me. I don't really fit the stereotype that you think that I should fit into, I guess, or that the media sometimes portrays. I'm just a person that speaks in a certain way, maybe acts in a certain way because of the environment that I'm around. Maybe if I was in a different environment, I'd act in a slightly different way. That shouldn't matter. So, yeah.
Really quickly, I want to touch upon something that Ashley had said about the Black experience. Too many times I've seen the word whitewashed being thrown around, and it's used to degrade people who talk in a way or act in a way that is resembling towards white people. And at first I didn't see the inherent issue in it because, like, they're probably around white people, so they act in a certain way. But who's to say that what they're acting is not part of the Black experience, because it's making us monolithic and it's just saying we all acted in a certain way. And I hate the word now because, first of all, it's used to demean other Black people when it shouldn't be. And second, who cares how they're acting? They're acting the way that they want to act. So shouldn't we respect them for that manner? And it's encompassing the way they talk, the way they dress, who they hang around with. It is none of our business as critiques or commentators on someone else's experience and lifestyle. We don't know them to begin with. And second, it's very much stereotyping our own community of saying we all supposed to act this way. And if you don't fit this model or this mold, then you're not a part of it and you're an outsider. And that's very much unproductive. And to the Hassan, situation, it reminds me of Hassan Minhaj. His name, he's a political commentator. He was on Ellen one time, and she pronounced his name incorrectly. And he sat with her in the beginning of the interview and said, "My name is Hassan, not Hassan." And when I saw that, that's what made me think maybe I should stop telling people my name is Ash when I first meet them and tell them my name first. And if I get to know them more, then I'll give them the rights to my nickname if I'm really close with them. So those two conversations that Ashley said really resonated with me. We need to change our language. We need to stop critiquing other people for their lifestyle choices. That's how they want to live. So let them do it. None of our business. And pronounce our names correctly. At least try to. I feel like the effort, once it's there, we'll move from that.
Thank you.
I'll be brief with mine as well. I think I just second a lot of what folks have said, and find like that triangulation that occurs. So a lot of mine are similar to Ashley's, where it was like, because I was a military brat, I oftentimes there was diversity, but I was probably the only like dark-skinned, Black, chubby girl in a space in all these classrooms with 20 plus students. So I go back and look at photos and I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. But some of the cultural things, I remember like some people were shaving in like the 4th or 5th grade. And so little things like that where folks might just be like, why don't you shave? And I'm like, I don't know, let me ask my mom if I can do this thing. But then feeling self-conscious maybe about wearing certain clothing after I was told like, no, you can't do that until you're older. But just that pointing out of just like, okay, this is something that I'm not allowed to do, but a lot of folks in my class are. And because I can't do that thing, they kind of would point it out, just like, yeah, your legs are hairy. It's like, oh, well, I'm 12. I don't really, I don't know what to tell you. But some of those things that we just have to like, that I found just as differences. I have facial features that are Afrocentric. And so I remember like, I don't know where I got an eyeliner pen or a brown pen to be able to learn how to like contour my nose. But I knew how to contour my nose from an early age. I had a difficult time with this question because I was like, some of these were just blatantly racist. Like I was called a gorilla as a child. And I'm like, there's a correlation somewhere between the fact that like from an early age, I was like, I need to slim this down and try and make this look thinner so that I present in a way that doesn't show off this feature. So some of those little things that like, we shouldn't have to, I should be able to be like, yes, this is my face. And this is whether or not you think it's beautiful or not, this is what I'm given. And I shouldn't have to like worry about what that looks like in comparison again to other people that look different, or kind of those beauty standards that are set either within our own community or maybe a Eurocentric standard as well. But yeah.
Thank you. All right, so now I'd like to transition to talking about allyship. And so I'm wondering what allyship looks like for you, and if you can think of any examples of allyship in practice that you've seen here at Oglethorpe.
One thing I can speak to certainly is Ashley and we're part of the same Petrol pod. And so we've been hanging out a lot this semester. And I'm sure she can, find examples of this too. But within our pod, occasionally we're 6 girls, but we all come from very different, different socioeconomic class, different, our parents had different professions. We all had very different experiences growing up. And so occasionally one of us will say something, and one of us will commit a microaggression, and, it's on us to call each other out and be like, hey, what did you mean by that? Did you realize that your words had this impact? And so, I can tell within our, little 6-woman friend group, we've been calling each other out very consistently and, helping each other learn and grow and realize, how to be good allies to one another. And I think by doing that within our own small group, we are able to then become responsible allies who can then go into the greater campus space and share our voices and our stories and talk about, all these little things that we've noticed and learned from. So yeah, that was definitely one of the better parts, I would say, of having the pods, is having that close-knit community that you are always with. But yeah, and even then, I can think about like sorority life. We, try to do a good job, despite the fact that my sorority is, predominantly white women. We do have a lot of sisters with, very intersectional identities. We have queer sisters. We have sisters who don't present, as female all the time. We have very different identities within our sorority. And so we, always try to do a good job of when we notice something that is potentially hurtful, when someone phrases something, absent-mindedly phrases something that could have an unintentional consequence of hurting someone's feelings, calling each other out on that and saying, hey, did you realize your words can have this impact? What you meant, if you had, changed your language to be more specific, you would have been able to be more precise with your message and your intention. But yeah, those types of little groups like that, I feel, have been one of the better experiences for me at Oglethorpe, is within our own little communities, kind of creating these allyship standards. And so then hopefully, especially once we get back in person and we are able to, commingle more as a campus community, we can, talk to each other and have these conversations with one another. But yeah.
Thank you.
I think another experience for me is when allies step in exchange for us. I feel like whenever I have to explain to someone, I'll give you an example. Last summer during the protests and things like that, there was a lot of tension within the freshman class about whether or not police brutality affects Black people disproportionately and if it exists. And so talking about your oppression is very, very draining, especially when someone denies that it exists. So not only have you have to engage in a debate about whether your life is in danger, you also have to, try to convince this person, all of that. And that's a very difficult conversation. But the allies that I have who are very close friends of mine stepped in and we're just like, we're not going to have this discussion. I'm not going to argue with you. And if they did try and try to mend that relationship and say, okay, this is where they're coming from, that I think is the best way of being an ally in those conversations, because it's so draining to, like I said, to have to defend yourself and defend your community when someone else, steps in for you and says that this isn't debatable. It takes that pressure off of you, and it also shows that they do care about you as a person, as a community, and in that fight for justice. So when non-BIPOC individuals step in for me, or saying that's out of pocket, don't say that, it's very becoming of them, and it's just testament to their character that they are that they care enough to step in a conversation that might seem hostile. So I love when people do that. So if you ever have a conversation with someone and someone says something that's kind of disrespectful or hurtful, step in as an ally, with whatever community it is. And to show your support that way, especially because it can be very, very draining to kind of defend yourself and defend your community.
I think I'm interested in folks kind of figuring out what their why is. And so those folks, the conversations that's kind of happening around allyship to co-conspiratorship, that there's a stepping out sometimes that you can do maybe as just an ally, being able to say I'm doing this because, right? And then we can talk more about then Indigenous sovereignty. We can talk about Black liberation and these connections to what is it that you feel super connected to and being an ally with this community. And then the way that it's been told to me is sometimes we do this thing where we're like, my kids, or for my partner, or for my grandchildren, or the people that but what is your reasoning? Just for you, no other people that you're connected to that you love, but just you, what your why is. And I totally agree with what has been stated before, just that we need folks that are supportive and showing up and leveraging their power and their privilege and understanding how those things kind of interact day to day.
I guess I could piggyback on that, the why. I like that. Because, well, one, I think about allyship as, to go back to Dr. Chandler's slides, right? It's action, right? And I see that happen in my classroom sometimes, right? I'm there as, I should be moderating that conversation if something comes up. Sometimes I don't even have a chance to because my students do that. And that's always wonderful to see. And they do it in a way that's respectful, right? It's not like you did this, now I'm going to make you feel like an outcast. But it's action. And also with the why, right? I think that something that's really important about allyship is also kind of seeing how dismantling oppressive power structures is good for everybody. It's not like, oh, that's good for Black people or that's good for queer people, right? It's good for everybody, in terms of how we think white supremacy hurts everybody. Heteropatriarchy hurts everybody. And so, yes, you should be showing up for people, but also kind of thinking about what does that mean, on a large scale to kind of de-center kind of what's been centered for so long in ways that are hurtful to everybody, but sometimes those who are in privileged positions don't necessarily think about it that way.
I would also just say yeah, allyship is just stepping up, even if it's just saying to someone hey, that's not cool. Because I've had people in high school say that if the teacher or a student said something that was similar to a microaggression or something that just wasn't culturally or ethically right, they just be hey, don't say that. That's not really like nice or anything. And I would say it's definitely just seeing things, understanding, and maybe taking some form of action, even if it's little. Like especially like over the summer, a lot of my like friends, they'd say they reached out to me. They're like, "Hey, Ashley, just with everything that's going on, everything about microaggressions, things like biases, please tell me if I've said something wrong, or if I say something wrong, call me out on it." Oh, bye. But I was like, thank you for caring. Like they, to my knowledge, they haven't done anything, but just like, thank you for caring enough or thinking enough and reflecting to say, you know what, let me see if I have said something or if there's anything that I can just do to be there for you. And that was just really great.
Great. Well, we are kind of winding down the conversation now. And there's been so much information that all of you have been able to share. But I'm just wondering, what do you hope is the biggest takeaway from this conversation? And I'll just sort of go around. I'll start with Ashrakat. What do you hope is the biggest takeaway from this?
Just to emphasize communication and to understand that, you know, like Josue said earlier, this is an evolving conversation and evolving behavior that you must cultivate, and no one knows everything from the beginning. So simply just asking questions: what is hurtful? How do I not do this? How do I support you in the best way? Do you feel comfortable with me stepping in these conversations? Having that dialogue, that constant dialogue throughout your relationship with people who are of color and who are Black is important. So just know that it's a continuous journey that never ends, and it's not always easy for everyone. But just having that constant communication will set you up for success for sure.
Thank you, Natasha.
That I don't know if it's delight in folks telling you when you've harmed them, but kind of, right? That there's a discomfort there, but I hope that there's something that you can switch in. Like if people are telling you about things that are happening, that's a good thing. I think there's a time sometimes where if things continue to occur, sometimes folks will stop mentioning it if they feel like they've told you or asked or just kind of put things out there. And they're not seeing a change in that way, they may not feel comfortable then trusting that that's something that you are interested in learning more about. So I would just say kind of delight in folks bringing this conversation up and wanting to talk about it and in wanting to reduce harm. I don't know, that's a lot of words, but yeah, get happy about it if you can.
Thank you. Janelle.
I guess for me, this idea that if we think about microaggressions as being these one-on-one things, oh, if I address this with one person, what impact does that have? But I think that if we think about our own enacting our own personal agency and having these tough conversations, that leads to a sea change, right? You only see kind of social change, cultural change, if enough people are willing to see that their own personal contributions to it have a much larger impact collectively. And so hopefully, folks that are watching this recording after the fact, right, are also kind of taking this in and thinking about how can I be part of that movement for change.
Sarah.
Yeah, kind of echoing everything that everyone said up to this point. First and foremost, I think being able to identify when a microaggression is occurring, like understanding exactly what it is so that you're able to identify it. And as Natasha said, and I'm really glad she brought this up, being comfortable with the discomfort that may come from all that, because you have to appreciate that the person who, brings this to your attention is taking their own time and energy to try and better your understanding of the world around you. And that it can be, as Ashrakat said, talking about trauma can be very taxing mentally and emotionally and even physically. So if someone takes the time to call you out and say, hey, do you understand the impact that your words might have had? Understand that for them, that can potentially be a very emotionally taxing process. And so thank them for their time and say, no, I did not realize that. And I will, I'm sorry if that's the intent, or if I'm sorry that that's the impact I've caused. And I will do better going forward. not getting defensive about when you get called out, just being comfortable and appreciative that someone actually did call you out. Because, when you don't care about someone, you just let them be. If I didn't care about anyone, I would never call out any of their microaggressions. But because I want to cultivate a better campus community, like I'm going to try my best to do that. And I think everyone else should also try and participate in that.
Thank you. And Ashley.
I would definitely say self-reflection is a big thing. Just self-reflecting on yourself, just being comfortable with looking back on things that you've done or said and then being able to realize that maybe that's wrong and then apologizing to someone, but also being comfortable also in calling people out, not in a harsh way or anything that would make them seem like you're like attacking them, but in a way that makes them think like, oh, I maybe should not have said that.
Great. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm really excited to get this up on the DEI website and to make it available for members of the campus community. And I'm also just grateful that there's so much knowledge and information available here on campus. So thank you, everybody, for participating. I think we might have a question here from Peter. Oh, you're on mute. Hold on. Okay.
Dr. Cower, you're still muted, it looks like.
I swore just now. I apologize, and I was explaining old dog and new tricks, and I've only been doing this for a year and a half. As we're winding down, I just wanted to add my thanks. My name is Peter Cower. I'm a professor of economics. I've been at Oglethorpe 20 years, directly out of a graduate program. And prior to that, I've been worked on Wall Street and other places. So I have sort of a little different background, and I just wanted to thank everyone. And starting with Dr. Chandler for setting up the space to be able to do that. And it's really helpful for me because I'm sort of coming at it from not from my own discipline. And as you all know, the longer you study a discipline, and especially a PhD, you sort of get brainwashed. I'm sure my colleagues, oh, this is being recorded, I better be more careful. But, set in a way of looking at things. So this is not something that I do out of my discipline, but the words like journey and evolution resonate with me since I came to Oglethorpe, because I love to teach, and there's been some significant changes in the way I approach that because I want to be effective. And I've discovered that when I first came, I just thought, here's the whiteboard, here's the equation, and it really helps you to learn it, and you develop certain ways of thinking about things. And economics, of course, is the most interesting. Sarah's agreeing with me, which is good, but is the most interesting topic, of course. And I teach macroeconomics, which is even further away, and I look at 150-year periods. So everything you've said has been really helpful, and your honesty and I think your compassion has been really wonderful. So I just wanted to thank you so very much for that. And it's really helpful. And I think it's going to continue. And then I've had some personal journeys as well. And the more and more I think about it, the way to reach people is exactly through that. Is one of the definitions of what love is focusing your attention on someone. So when you're correcting someone, and Sarah, I hope in the future, or we'll talk offline, that if I transgress something, I just hope and pray you'll let me know. But that willing attention is a form of love. And so when you're sharing that with someone, I hope that they'll take that into consideration, because my personal journey is that we're all in this together, and that there are more similarities than there are dissimilarities. And yet I've noticed I'm the only one of my complexion and gender and age on the call or on the Zoom. So I hope that this gets out to further because it's really important. And what Sarah said earlier and some other people, and thank you, Dr. Bird and Ashley. And is it Akat is the last Ashkat? And I'm terrible.
Ashrakot.
Ashrakat, thank you for,
Mhm.
and please correct me again, because I went into economics because it has numbers. And
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you for trying. You did it well.
oh, thanks. And it's a beautiful name. So I just wanted to thank you. And Dr. Pham, is always wonderful to see you, and thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.